today we're going to tackle one of the biggest, most fundamental questions in all of politics. It's an idea that has fueled revolutions and literally shaped the world we live in. We're talking about the problem of property.
It seems pretty simple at first, right? You own your phone, you buy a coffee, it's your coffee. But hang on, do you own the air you breathe? What about an idea you have? All of a sudden, this whole concept of owning something gets really complicated really fast. What actually gives you a right to something? And maybe more importantly, where does that right end?
So, to really get to the bottom of this, we first have to ask a bigger question. What even is property? And I'm telling you, it's probably not what you think. See, property isn't actually the thing itself, like the phone in your hand. It's the right to use that phone, to sell it, to do what you want with it. It's a right that society agrees to respect and that the law agrees to enforce. It's basically a web of social agreements we've all made with each other. It's a relationship. And once you start seeing property as this system of rights, you realize, hey, it could be organized in totally different ways. And that realization has sparked one of the most ferocious debates in modern history, a real clash of two rival philosophies. So it really boils down to this. On one side, you've got private property. This is all about the right to exclude other people. It's the idea of this is mine and not yours. But on the other side, you have common property. This is the exact opposite. It's the right not to be excluded. It's the idea of this is ours, and we all have a right to access it. All right, so let's start with the idea that pretty much dominates the modern world. Why has this concept of private, individual ownership become so incredibly powerful?
Well, the arguments for private property are really compelling, and they come at you from a few different directions. There's a moral argument, about owning yourself. There's a super practical one about what makes an economy work. There's a political one about freedom. And there's even a psychological one about who we are as people.
This right here is the classic argument, the OG laid out by John Locke way back in the 17th century. The idea is actually pretty simple. You own your body, right? So you must also own the work, the labor that your body does. When you go out and take something from the wild, like picking an apple or cutting down a tree, and you mix your labor with it, well, that thing becomes an extension of you. It becomes your property. Okay, now let's fast forward a few hundred years to the 20th century. You got thinkers like this guy, Robert Nozick. He took Locke's ideas and just ran with them, pushing them to their logical and pretty radical conclusion. Nozick was a huge figure in the rise of libertarianism, and his ideas are still massively influential today. For Nozick, it was all about the process. As long as you got something fairly to begin with, you didn't steal it. And as long as every time it changed hands, it was voluntary, then the outcome is just. That's it. It doesn't matter if one person ends up with almost everything and another person ends up with almost nothing. And from this point of view, taxing the rich to help the poor, that's not social justice. It's basically a form of theft carried out by the government. But for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction, right? For as long as people have been defending private property, there have been powerful critics who say it's the root cause of all our problems. The philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau saw the whole origin of private property completely differently. He didn't see it as a just act of mixing your labor with something. He saw something much, much darker. He basically argued that the first guy to build a fence around a piece of land and say, "This is mine," well, that guy was the true founder of civil society and all the crime, war, and misery that came with it. And then you get the anarchist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who took that critique and boiled it down to just 3 explosive words. When he said property is theft, he meant that the very idea of private ownership is illegitimate. He argued it lets a property owner get rich off the work of others without having to lift a finger themselves, essentially stealing the value that the community creates. Karl Marx took this even further. He argued that the whole history of private property wasn't some peaceful, natural process. He called it primitive accumulation, basically a violent process of kicking people off common land, divorcing them from the means of survival. And for Marx, that is what created the two great rival classes, the owners and the workers. So the fundamental idea here is a totally different way of looking at work. For this side, labor isn't an individual act, it's social. We all depend on each other, on the work of those who came before us and those around us. So if that's true, then the wealth we create together should be owned together, in common, to strengthen our social bonds, not to create competition and greed. Now, this vision has a very famous problem. You've probably heard of it. Imagine a pasture that's open to everybody. Every single herder has a personal incentive to add more of their own cattle, right? They get all the benefit from their extra cow, but the cost
The overgrazing is shared by everyone. So what's the predictable result? The common pasture gets destroyed. This is the tragedy of the commons. It's worth pointing out, though, that many people argue this isn't a law of nature. Real-world communities have managed common resources for centuries through complex social rules, avoiding both total privatization and total destruction.
Okay, so this whole philosophical battle we've been talking about, it isn't just some abstract debate for the classroom. It leads directly to two completely different ways of organizing an entire economy. So on one side, you've got the market. It's a decentralized system. It's organized by prices and competition, and it naturally lines up with the whole idea of private property. On the other side, you have the plan. This is a centralized system where a government or some other authority makes the big economic decisions. And this, of course, lines up with state-owned or common property.
And there you have it. That's the link. The old philosophical fight between the right to exclude and the right not to be excluded becomes the real-world political battle between capitalism and socialism, between the individual and the collective. So where does all this leave us today? Has one side just won? Well, not exactly.
The truth is, every single modern society is a hybrid, a mix of both. I mean, think about your own life. You might own your house, which is private property, but you use public roads to get around, and you might take your kids to a public park on the weekend. The real battle, the one that defines so much of our politics, is about where we draw the line between the market and the plan, between what's private and what's common. And you see this conflict literally everywhere. Debates about taxes, about public land, about healthcare, even about things like copyright and patents. These are all just modern battlefields in this centuries-old war of ideas. Which brings us right back to the central question. What is the right balance? There's no easy answer here. Every choice we make as a society is about trying to navigate this tension. And trying to find that balance, well, that is the ongoing and maybe endless problem of property.